Allen Lund Company has new offices in Ogden, Utah, and Indianapolis, Indiana. Check allenlund.com to reach them.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
Dockworkers at 3 dozen ports along the East and Gulf Coasts are threatening to strike on October 1st. News anchor Scott Thompson and Jamie Jones of Landline magazine talk about the potential impact on the trucking industry. The American Transportation Research Institute's new report on detention time starts with some good news. Alex Leslie, Senior Research Associate at ATRI, shares what they found about the problem of detention time, its effect on the industry, and possible solutions. When it comes to hiring on a driver, there are a few things you should take into consideration, and your insurance is one of them. Ashley Blackford sits down with the folks from OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department to discuss hired drivers. And finally, the number of loads posted on the DAT One load board hit 2019 levels last week. Robert Rouse of DAT has the details, along with all the other pertinent information from the spot market to help you make decisions. And now, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Scott here, joined in Studio A by Jamie Jones of Landline Magazine. Jamie, how we doing?
Hey, doing good.
We've got a few stories to cover here, Jamie, and we'll start by looking at the calendar. October 1st, that's when dock workers at 3 dozen ports along the East Coast and the Gulf Coast regions are threatening to walk off the job, and they appear to be serious here. The International Longshoremen's Union is asking for wage hikes and some other concessions about automation and robotics that they're just not happy with right now. A short-term strike, should it happen, Jamie, most analysts and experts don't think there would be too much of a fallout from that, but let's do the hypothetical here. Look at a longer-term strike, if it were to happen, would be very noticeable. And for trucking, that means a serious, possibly a serious disruption to the supply chain.
100%. And, when you talk about if you're not unloading these containers off the ships, if the union absolutely stops work, it's just gridlock at the ports at that point. And analysts, when you say it's not going to take a lot of time if it's short-term, analysts say a 1-day strike at these ports would take a minimum of 5 days to recover. Mm-hmm. So, that's a lot when you start adding it up. Say a week, you've got 7 days. Mm-hmm. You're looking at November at that point before things, and that's a lot of your Christmas shipments that are still, the last stragglers are coming in from wherever overseas. And you really have to be concerned about when 43% of your port traffic shuts down over a strike. That's going to have a ripple effect that will be felt quickly and across the country.
Yeah, and the union, again, I think they understand that, and they're using that probably as leverage here, knowing what the consequences could be there. We should mention the Biden administration has told Reuters they don't plan to step in and block a strike. They could do that, actually, through something called the Federal Taft-Hartley Act, but again, they say they're not going to. We've had these discussions before about potential strikes at other ports. I know along the West Coast, I think that was last year, if I can remember my timeline. But we catch these things, every so often here they come up. The big question is, you're talking a lot of freight sitting there. What happens to it? And we don't know. There are options, but those options are kind of limited based on...
They really are. Yeah. So you have to assume that, it's the pipeline effect, if you will. So containers that are already at the ports, delivered in the U.S., be it at an East Coast port or Gulf Coast, those have to be trucked out. So we still have that residual container freight that would help things out. But once that residual freight that's already been offloaded from the ships, if you don't have a way to get it out of there, off the ships and out of there, then you have a problem. So, that's a couple of things, because the union's going to be responsible for the unloading and staging of them. And then you're like, okay, but now we've got to figure out how to move all this backlog really fast. Can trucks do it? How many times a year do we talk about port traffic congestion and, the inefficiencies at the port? That's why recoveries don't happen. And it's really funny because the past year or so, the barge lobby, if you will, the river barge lobby, has really been pushing the fact that, hey, we can take over some of this container equipment for you. It's greener. It's greener. We don't have the carbon footprint that trucking and all these other things. Well, right now, the barge carriers are having huge issues because of the drought that's hit the country. And the Mississippi barge operators on there have already dropped their tow traffic and weight right around a third.
Yeah.
So there's just not a lot of options. And unfortunately, we are reliant on this freight coming in from overseas.
October 1st, we'll keep an eye on that, and obviously we'll keep you updated on any new developments on those talks there. Let's move on to another topic here briefly, cargo theft, a focus of late, as we've seen instances, of course, skyrocket in recent years. Some good news, though, perhaps out of New Jersey, where authorities say they've arrested 4 men who were caught trying to break into a tractor-trailer that was loaded with meat. Authorities are apparently linking them to at least 9 cargo theft incidents along the New Jersey Turnpike in recent years. The criminal justice process obviously needs to play out here, Jamie, but finally some positive news in really what's been a string of just negative news with regard to cargo theft.
It really is negative news. I mean, your inner 13-year-old can giggle about beef being stolen out of freight, out of a trailer in Philadelphia where we make a big Philly cheesesteak party.
Yeah.
The jokes are there, but the reality is cargo theft has become extremely lucrative, especially when you look at grocery prices and meat prices and all of the things. I mean, anybody who's gone to the store, one week you'll go in and it's, you can get your chicken for $1.99 a breast, and then you turn around and 2 weeks later it's $7.
Yeah.
What happened,
Yeah.
So theft has become, unfortunately, a lucrative business operation, and the Philadelphia and New Jersey area have suffered tremendously because of that. So I highly suspect that the 4 people who were arrested in the, quote, Operation Beef Bandit, I love the name that the cops gave it, it's an organized cargo ring. And there's going to be a lot more to follow on this. I cannot believe that 4 individuals have pulled off the number of thefts that they've had, the amount of freight that they've been, snow crab legs, beef. We've had all kinds of food products stolen in this particular area. So it's nice to see it. But again, there's just been 4 guys arrested. So if you are delivering in the Northeast, in these areas, be mindful of it, because a lot of times they're hitting trucks at night while the driver's sleeping. So
we hear it all the time.
Be safe. Try and find a well-lit, safe place to park. I know it's hard, but, you're more important than your freight.
Absolutely, 100%. And hopefully we'll have more stories like this where they catch more of the bad guys and we see some of this stuff go down. Jamie, we'll leave it there, but we appreciate your time as always.
Hey, you're welcome.
And in some other news here, new analysis from truckinfo.net indicates that nearly 10,000 motor carriers left the industry in the first half of this year. It follows a trend in recent years spurred by the pandemic. The balance, however, is still lopsided. There are now 33,000 fewer motor carriers in operation as compared to a post-COVID high in December of 2022. But truckinfo.net says the number of carriers is up by 64,000 compared to the pre-COVID boom, meaning overcapacity is still an issue there. And the Department of Justice is going after the 2 companies that owned and operated the container ship that hit Baltimore's Key Bridge in March. The Justice Department filed a lawsuit on Wednesday seeking more than $100 million in penalties, claiming that the company sent an ill-prepared crew on an unseaworthy vessel. Federal prosecutors say the $100 million would cover the costs of the government response to the bridge collapse and for the extensive effort to clear the wreckage. That's Landline Now News for today. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. Next, Alex Leslie of ATRI discusses the organization's recent research on detention time. We'll hear about hiring drivers in your insurance from the folks at OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department. And Scott Thompson covers some good news regarding the number of loads out there with Robert Rouse of DAT. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and information. Please stay with us. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Capital Reman is your leading source for quality remanufactured engines and components. Capital Reman stands ready to serve all OOIDA members to help reduce costly engine repairs or replacement. Visit capitalreman.com today and use code OOIDA10 to save.
Penske is the trusted source for quality used trucks. Whether you search our website, call our sales staff, or bid at our online auction, you are sure to find the right used truck for your business. Visit PenskeUsedTrucks.com to view our inventory and learn more.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Welcome back to Landline Now. Detention time is an unfortunate reality for the trucking industry, one that costs drivers both time and money. A new report from the American Transportation Research Institute puts the problem into new perspective. And to go over it, we are joined on the phone by Alex Leslie, Senior Research Associate at ATRI. Alex, how are we doing?
Doing well, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. We have a lot of information to parse through here, so we'll do our best to kind of go over the greatest hits, or I guess lowest hits, I guess, in the case of this here. I want to start with a simple question, because obviously anybody who's driven a truck knows what detention time is. They've gone through it. But in the context of your report, and just by definition, I think it's important to make sure that we note exactly what detention time is defined as in terms of real time. And in doing that, can you also talk about how you came up with all this data that we're going to talk about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our working definition of detention is any time more than 2 hours after the scheduled appointment time. So it doesn't take any of that slack time when you get there early into account. It doesn't include that initial 2 hours. It's any time after that 2 hours following the appointment time. So the reason we chose that is because as part of our surveys collecting data, we found that once again, this has been the case for a while, but that's the most common definition, that 2 hour threshold. Some of you out there are it's a 1 hour threshold for some are at a 3 hour threshold, but 2 is the most common. And so that's what we stuck with. And we saw that we really had 3 different forms of data collection for this. One was a big driver survey, which we've done several times over the last decade. So we got to see some nice time series there. One was a motor carrier survey to get all the nitty-gritty numbers. And then we also used our truck GPS data as well to do some analysis.
All right, so let's jump into the data here. And again, there's a whole lot to dissect here. But I want to start with the good news, because we do have plenty of bad news to talk about as well, unfortunately. But the good news from this report is that detention time is generally down across the board, right? Can you run us through those numbers and what they show as compared to previous years?
Yeah, so in 2023, we saw that drivers experienced detention in a little over 39% of all stops, which is pretty high, right?
Yeah,
That's more than 1 in 3. But it is, believe it or not, 6.5 percentage points lower than what it was 10 years ago. So we are seeing fewer stops with detention. Not a huge drop there, but it is some improvement. And the biggest area where we saw that improvement was on stops with long detention time. So, 2 to 4 hours of detention or more than 4 hours. But again, still more than a third of all stops. And depending on who you are or what sector you're in, that could be worse. We saw refrigerated drivers, over 50% of all stops had detention. Women experienced more than men. And spot market freight had more detention than contract freight.
Yeah, which I find all of it interesting in one way or another. And we're certainly going to talk about kind of the negative aspects, or I guess the negative findings from this report here. But the fact that it did go down, I think you said 6 percentage points, right, from 10 years earlier. Do you have any sense as to why that is? I mean, do we have any understanding of why things are, granted, they're not good, but they are better than they were 10 years ago, just in the context of those numbers right there? Do we have any idea of why?
We didn't test this with data, so we don't have tons of information on that, but anecdotally, what we've heard and what we've sort of seen more broadly is a couple things. On the one hand, drivers are able to share information about, repeated offenders more easily, right? We've got more and more channels now for posting that information online, for for sharing, who you want to avoid or who you want to arrive early at to try to avoid that yourself. And on the other hand, we do see that, customers, shippers, they are, they have adopted some better, for example, scheduling software that allows them to at least get some of the obvious detention down a little bit. Now, they're still not paying nearly enough attention to detention, but there has at least been some improvement on the shipper side in terms of just managing the scheduling.
Yeah, which is encouraging. But as you pointed out just a moment ago, it also depends on who you are and what you're hauling, right? Because your detention time could be worse if you're in one of those 2 groups or 3 groups or whatever it was. But you mentioned that women drivers, I think it was 49% are being detained at their all their stops, and then reefer trailer drivers as well, right? Any sense as to what's behind those numbers and why that may be worse? I mean, we can speculate, and I know maybe anecdotally you got some feedback there, but those numbers kind of stood out to me as well.
Yeah, for reefers, we know that in food services in general, just delayed times, it's partly due to the commodities being hauled, right? If the facility doesn't yet have, space for, cooled space to hold what they're going to be taking off the truck, they might leave it wait on the truck in the meantime. And you're more likely to have live load and unloads in that refrigerated space as well than in the dry van space, where you're going to have a bit more of the drop and hook on an industry-wide level. For women, this is, in both cases, these are statistically significant findings. And so it's one of the things that we've heard when we've interviewed and worked with women specifically in research that we've done is that they tend to be a bit more patient. They tend to be a bit less likely to assert their rights or their comfort, really, when it comes to being detained for long periods of time. So, squeaky wheel gets the grease. Mm-hmm. If you've got somebody who's complaining a lot, you might service them quicker to just get them out of your hair. That is a largely anecdotal factor, but it is something that we've heard a lot and pretty consistently over the last 10 years, frankly.
Yeah, it's frustrating to hear that and to know that is going on out there for sure. Let's talk about the implications of this, because you get into this in your report as well. We can look at this in 2 ways, I think, in terms of dollars and cents. We can also talk about the safety aspect of it. Let's start with what it's costing the industry in terms of dollars and cents and in terms of productivity lost. Both of those areas there are impacted pretty heavily from this, right? What did your research find?
Yeah, so we started by just looking at per driver per year, and so truckload, for example, an average driver in the truckload space is spending about 173 hours detained each year.
Wow.
Which is a lot of time, right? Yeah. And if we then multiply that by the number of trucks, running dry vans in the country, just in the for-hire sector, I should say, we're not really looking at the private trucking space, that ends up being almost 73 million hours total. And that's just for truckloads. So industry overall, it's almost 136 million hours.
Wow.
And then if you take that and just multiply it by, we know costs. We do operational costs every year. If you just multiply that by the average cost per hour, you come out with, well, I shouldn't say that. We do a couple other things. Not all of the costs. You're not, for example, paying certain costs when you're stopped. But
Sure.
But you are making your truck payments still. You're still making your payments on your insurance. You're still burning fuel because you're idling.
Yeah.
And so if you add up those expenses that do still happen when you're detained, that amounts to $3.6 billion in direct expenses that the for-hire trucking industry loses every year during detention.
Yeah, it's just a wildly high amount of money. And I mean, again, anybody who's been following the industry for a number of years knows that this is a problem and know that it's costing costing people money out there. Another great point that you made in this report, and I think it's not maybe emphasized enough, is that there is a safety aspect to this as well, right? Because you found that people are feeling like they've got to make up time, so in turn they are speeding, right, to their next location. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about what you found there?
Yeah, we looked at trucks that were detained, again, using that more than 2-hour threshold, versus trucks that weren't detained. And then we looked at their speeds before and after a stop. And what we found is that trucks are actually going faster on average after and before detained stops, and with a high level of statistical significance. And so that's kind of incredible for a couple reasons. One, we know that speeding is often associated with crashes, heavy-duty truck crashes. But the fact that that trucks are going faster before being detained as well tells us that and tells everyone what drivers already know, that detention isn't just something that you react to after it happens. It's something that drivers have to think about constantly. You have to be thinking ahead about, oh, heck, I have an appointment at a spot that I know is probably going to detain me. So I have to try to get there earlier.
Yeah.
And so that's why it showed in our analysis that those average speeds are higher beforehand, too.
And I think that's one reason FMCSA, I know, is studying this issue. I think they launched a study earlier this year to look into detention time and the problems that are associated with it and come from it. Your report does provide some recommendations, some advice for folks out there as we try to, as an industry, tackle this issue. And again, with safety and money in mind, to make it a better situation for everybody. Can you walk us through some of those recommendations and what you're, asking people to do out there?
Yeah, I mean, one of them is negotiating detention fees. We've seen costs go up by over 20% in the last several years, and in that same period of time, detention fees, owner-operators, brokers, or motor carriers charge to their customers have only gone up by a fraction of that. So a big part of the problem is that detention fees just are not doing the job. And even when they exist, more often than not, detention is actually not even, you don't even get the fee, right? Again, drivers know this, but as an industry, we need to do what we can to try to be tougher on making sure that detention fees actually get paid when they're supposed to. We know that drivers are trying to arrive early. Sometimes that works. Sometimes that just means you're doing your time before instead of after. A lot of folks are trying to switch to drop and hook when they can, stay away from live unload as much as possible. And frankly, one of the biggest factors is communication, really. The fact is that a lot of customers don't know the scale of this problem, which we've been talking about it and complaining about it enough as a trucking industry that we all know about it. But a lot of the customers that we work with, or the folks sort of higher up the ladder with those customers, are not aware of how bad it is, which is really part of the reason why we undertook this report in the first place. Because, guess what? Drivers pay the price of detention. Motor carriers, companies pay the price of detention. But so do shippers. Right, when they have to pay the fees or just when they have to wait longer for their stuff to get there because drivers have been detained at the previous stops. Yeah.
It's a fascinating report. I wish it was telling us better information, more rosy information, but, reality is reality. Alex, we appreciate your time and your work on this report.
My pleasure, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Our thanks to Alex Leslie of ATRI. This is just one of many studies and reports the Institute has put out in recent months. You can check them all out at truckingresearch.org. We'll step out for a quick break. Landline Now is back right after this.
Truckdown.com. Whenever you have a breakdown, you need Truckdown.com. 24/7 access to 40,000 verified heavy-duty repair vendors nationwide. Repair secured. Load assured. Truckdown.com.
Firestone tires are for more of everything, with more durability for more miles and more confidence in your fleet. Firestone's tested tires help fleets save with value where it matters most. Learn more at bridgestonenationalfleet.com/4moremiles.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
For can't-miss accuracy, weigh your truck on a CAT scale.
Landline Now, welcome back. Like tires, fuel, and an engine, insurance is one of those things you just have to have for your truck. But not all insurance is created equal. Ashley Blackford is here with the experts from OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department to answer some questions.
Thanks, Mark, and hello to Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby with OOIDA's Insurance Department. How are you doing today, ladies?
Stellar.
Doing great. How are you?
I am wonderful.
Good.
Today we are talking about hired drivers and the impact they can have on your operation. First off, what is a hired driver and what kind of situations would they be used in?
So really, we kind of like to classify people in 3 different categories dealing with the insurance, and those are the owner-operator with their own authority, the owner-operator leased to a company, and the hired driver. And really, the hired driver could work for either of those other 2 categories. So as far as when they can be utilized, that's really, either a leased owner-operator or an owner-operator with their own authority could utilize a hired driver.
Yeah, a hired driver is going to have the CDL. Obviously, they're going to have the same qualifications as any driver. They just don't own their own truck generally, so they drive for someone else.
What do a lot of people not realize about hired drivers?
Well, when it comes to the insurance, I think the big thing is they don't realize the impact that it can have on your insurance as far as rates are concerned, as far as their records are concerned, their history is concerned, and not just the immediate impact they can have on your insurance, but the long-term impact they can have on your insurance as well.
Because, of course, when you have your own authority or own your own truck and you put someone besides yourself in there to drive, insurance, claims, things of that nature, it's all going to come back on you. And we've seen the situations where someone has had a hired driver in the truck, there's been an accident. Sometimes it's been bad enough where the driver is gone before a police report can even be filed. I mean, they sometimes will just straight take off. And, we're not generalizing or saying that's going to happen anytime you have a hired driver. It's just kind of the worst case scenario that we've seen. And that kind of insurance claim is not going to follow that driver around for 3+ years. It's going to follow you, the owner of the truck, whoever has the authority. And those are the sticky situations we've seen our customers caught up in because they can't even find the driver to give a statement on the accident.
And that's really one of the biggest reasons that hired drivers tend to drive up the cost of premiums of insurance because, you're not going to have an owner-operator leave their own truck. I mean, it's really rare. And so there's just a lot more pressure on the owner-operator or the owner of the equipment and not quite as much on that hired driver. And like Trina said, I mean, we're definitely not saying all hired drivers are like that because we've dealt with lots of cases of really great hired drivers. It's just that if a situation like that's going to occur, it's going to occur with a hired driver.
Well, and we have to have that conversation with our customers sometimes because you will find that a lot of insurance companies now are not necessarily veering away from hired drivers, but they might have more stringent guidelines. So maybe insurance company won't allow you to add one for X amount of time. Maybe you can't add an owner-operator or a hired driver ever. Maybe it'll take a couple of years. And we've had to have the conversation with our customers if and when they get frustrated about that and just let them know, your truck is your investment and obviously you're going to protect your investment, whereas someone who doesn't own the equipment or have a financial interest in it isn't always going to be as likely to protect your investment.
Yeah, they have no ties to it. So.
Right, and it does hit home for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people out there do understand that. So, it's not an easy conversation to have, and it's not anything that insurance companies like doing, but it is a risk.
Are you able to add a clause to the lease with a hired driver to change who's responsible in the event of a crash?
You are not. I mean, really, that's a federally mandated. Whoever owns the authority is who's ultimately responsible for the accident, and there's no way to change that. Many have tried.
Yeah.
You know, we've had a lot of people, a lot of different motor carriers, or the leased owner operator. We've had people try to change that in the past, but it's never going to work. It's always going to come back on those numbers.
The most you could do is if you have your own authority and you lease on an owner-operator, you could put it in your lease agreement that they have to carry bobtail. So that might protect you a little bit as a motor carrier if they're not under dispatch or something of that nature. But as far as the primary liability goes, no. I mean, if you hold the numbers, you have to provide that insurance.
And how important is it to talk to your insurance company before bringing on a hired driver?
I think it's huge. I mean, like we were saying, every insurance company is going to take a different approach to it. Some may have conditions or clauses. There's a lot of variables as far as what does the lease agreement say? What are you contractually obligated to through a lease or through having your own authority? And honestly, insurance is one of the things that is going to kind of make or break what path you choose. And I say that cautiously because we always encourage folks to just find an insurance company that suits your needs. Don't change your plan or your operation to suit the insurance company, because it really is about just finding a place that fits your operation.
And in the end, that's not going to be a balance. That's not going to be the balance that you're looking for. You're not going to be happy because you had planned on a different operation. So if you're changing your operation to fit a certain insurance company's willingness, then in the end, you're going to end up being unhappy. And one thing that I did want to say, Trina had mentioned earlier, insurance company guidelines. And hopefully that the insurance company is bringing up their guidelines or mentioning their guidelines to you at the time that you're getting the policy started or that sort of thing. But if they're not, it's important to ask that question, because if you plan on hiring a driver in a year and it's one of those companies that she said, we'll never allow a hired driver, you're going to be unhappy with them, and then you're going to have to deal with possible cancellations or, that sort of thing too. So always, if that's not something if that's not a conversation that they are having with you, that's an important question to ask.
Absolutely. Yeah, and even kind of branching off of that, just for example, we had a call the other day, and it kind of relates to a couple of different things that we've said so far. But we had a call the other day, and the gentleman wanted to lease on to a motor carrier. And the motor carrier, the insurance company that they were with, will not allow leased owner operators. So they're saying you can own trucks and you can put drivers in those trucks, but you can't lease an owner operator. Because of our insurance company guidelines. And so then, from what I hear, I didn't take the call, but from what I hear, the motor carrier then suggested that the owner-operator just sign his truck, like basically put his truck in their name, which is... I'm having trouble finding the words.
Yeah.
The agent that talked to him said, "You're not thinking about that, are you?" And he was like, "Oh, goodness, no."
Yeah.
But it just made me think of the various types of things and situations that can occur when there is kind of a road insurance company roadblock. And again, the insurance company doesn't want to put you in a bind as far as your operation goes. And I speak as someone who works at this particular company. A lot of insurance companies want your money.
Yeah.
Period. And so if you offer to change your operation just to get insurance with them, they'll probably let you. They'd be happy to let you because they're getting that money from you. But at the end of the day, the reason that Tristan and I keep talking about this so much is because we have seen how that turns out. Someone thinks that they can kind of go by our guidelines. They'll change their operation to suit that or to get a quote. And then before even a year is up, there's something that arises that makes them unhappy. Or maybe we say you can't have a hired driver right now. Then they have they put one in the truck anyway. There's a claim, and then half of the claim is denied because we
of
said
an unreported driver.
Yeah, and we said no hired driver.
And once you get into a situation like that, that is hard to ever get away from, because a lot of times, and I mean, I can see how it can honestly happen, but once you get yourself into that sort of situation, I mean, you know, especially with that insurance company, you've kind of got the scarlet letter for. Ooh, sorry. Sorry. You've got that scarlet letter for life, though. And I mean, those are the kinds of things you're trying to avoid. And even what we were talking about earlier with a claim that follows you, you know, you may be the best driver and have a spectacular record, but if you had somebody have a $350,000 claim plus under your insurance, that's really going to void you for a big period of time.
I'm going to be honest, like we've had this conversation so much that it really doesn't give me as much anxiety as Trista saying scarlet letter. I mean, I'm so anxious about that now. It's true, though. I mean, we speak on this stuff because we've seen it. We've seen multiple situations, not just one. It's not like, oh, in 20 years here, this one time we saw X happen. It's been multiple times, and it's devastating. It can put you out of business. You know, if you have half of a $350,000 claim or whatnot that's denied or not covered because of insurance guidelines, it'll put a lot of people out of business. And obviously, we don't want to see that happen.
Now, you've touched on a few of these, but say someone does have a hired driver, they get in an accident, there's a claim. What other kinds of impacts can that have on you?
I mean, I think the biggest one is, first off, talking about what Trina was saying earlier, and that is, you know, making sure that hired driver is still going to be around and be able to be a part. I mean, sometimes there's you know, court obligations and that sort of thing with the claim, making sure that you've hired somebody with some longevity that's going to stick around and help defend in the case that is what's needed. But really long term, I think, is the impact that it has on your insurance and your ability to find insurance moving forward.
Well, and kind of segueing into other impacts, you know, if you have your own authority, a lot of folks are going to be looking at SAFER or like a PSP report. You know, I know when we look up a DOT number, maybe you didn't have the drug violation, maybe you didn't have the crash, maybe you didn't have the poor inspection, but it shows up. And so then
stays with your numbers.
It does stay with your numbers. So we always say vet the drivers. You know, vet your driver. It's not always going to prevent something happening. Yeah. But look at their employment history. And we should also say, too, a lot of people will hire someone who's a long-time friend, family member. We've seen things go ill in those situations, too. So it doesn't always mean that those cases are exempt from
reviewing a motor vehicle report of that best friend.
Yeah.
Right. And we've still seen the tough situations with those type of drivers. Sometimes worse, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
What do you recommend someone do if they are looking at a hired driver? What kind of things can they do to check their record?
Well, they're definitely required to have a motor vehicle report on hand. I think, you know, if that's something they're comfortable doing and looking into the employment history, that's great. I think there are companies that can help with that. I think you can even call our business services department and they can point you in the right direction and help guide you through that process.
Yeah, and I believe they have a section that even specializes in what you need to keep together for as far as a driver file goes, because you are required to have a driver file. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. Definitely talk to your insurance company, research the guidelines as far as what you have to physically have on file for that driver too.
All right. Ladies, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Our thanks to Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department. If you have any questions about insurance, you can call 816-229-5791. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. We'll be back after this.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2024 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
If you're running ultra-low sulfur diesel in your vehicle, make sure you are prepared and protected all winter long with Howe's Diesel Treat, the #1 anti-gel product in North America from the 100-plus year trusted brand Howe's Products.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. There are a number of critical questions you need to answer in order to run a successful trucking business. Among the most important of those questions are, where's the freight going to be, and how much is it going to pay? Today, Landline Now news anchor Scott Thompson will bring us answers to both of those important questions, with a look at this week's freight markets with the folks from DAT. Here's Scott now with a report.
Thanks, Mark, as we welcome Robert Rouse of DAT to the show. Robert, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
Thanks for talking to us. We've got a lot of data to get through here. Let's jump right in, Robert, with all the pertinent data from the spot market last week. How are we looking?
Yeah, last week, we saw a little bit of a bounce back. The number of loads on the DAT One load board increased by 6.9%. That's up to 1.62 million. That is running at a similar level as we saw back in 2019. While overall load posts were up, we saw really the increase in dry van loads increase by about 4%. Reefers decreased just a little bit by 1.5%. Really where we saw a big change was in flatbeds. We saw a pretty big increase of 17.7% in total flatbed load volume last week, which is a really good sign and kind of indicator into what potentially is happening in the market based on some of the natural events that were happening. But when we look at the number of total trucks on the DAT One load board, we saw the trucks increase by about 15.3%. That's up to 337,000. Based on DOT authority data, we can see that we're still having net negative overall authorities all year long so far in 2024. But even with that, some of those carriers leaving the market, we've still seen a pretty consistently strong number of trucks in the spot market, which is really keeping the market right where it's at.
Yeah, and some encouraging information and numbers there for sure. We're seeing a little bit more of that here as the weeks and months kind of carry on, and we'll hope it continues on in that way. What about load-to-truck ratios? How did they look last week?
Yeah, we saw load-to-truck ratios decrease for both vans and reefers, and that's really because we saw the number of loads increase, but the number of trucks increased even more. While flatbeds saw a slight increase in the load-to-truck ratio, this is mainly due to a full week of loads and more trucks being available last week than the week prior. If we look specifically at one example, for dry van loads, post volumes bounced back last week following Labor Day, but are still about 30% lower than last year. But carriers returned to the market in higher numbers, increasing by about 13% week over week. That's resulted in a 12% decrease in dry van load-to-truck ratio, down to 3.27. That's 8% above the long-term load-to-truck average for this time this year.
All right. So, yeah, kind of a mixed bag there, it sounds like, as well. Freight rates, what are we seeing there?
Yeah, overall line haul rates are pretty flat or down slightly, but they're tracking with what we'd expect seasonally. This is typically a time in the season where we expect things to be a little bit low until we really start seeing a small ramp up going into the holiday shopping season at the end of the year, when we see rates start to pick up in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. Looking at each one individually, van rates came in at $2 per mile, which is pretty much right where we've been. Reefer rates kind of at $2.41 per mile. Those were flat as well. The only change we're seeing in both van and reefer is really in the percentage of that taking up of fuel costs. And flatbed was the only thing that really kind of saw a little bit of a bump. They're at $2.43 per mile last week, kind of erased some of the drop that we saw from the previous week.
Yeah, as you kind of mentioned earlier, we're seeing some, I think, seasonality on the spot market for sure. Adding into that, we've got hurricane season in full force. We had Francine, hitting the south pretty hard. I guess a week or so ago now. When you take all that into effect, what effect, I guess, if any, did that have on the spot market last week?
Yeah, so there's usually a spike in demand for essential supplies such as food, water, medical supplies, and building materials in the affected areas. So carriers may be redirected to handle relief and recovery efforts. These emergency deliveries are often prioritized over other commercial shipments, leading to backlogs in non-essential deliveries. And the severity of the storm really has a big impact on which equipment type load volume is impacted first. So a strong storm with property damage will lead to flatbed volume really increasing first. As we talked about just a second ago, flatbed volume is where we saw most of the big surge last week in loads. So if we focus on the Gulf Coast markets in the Southeast region, severely impacted by Hurricane Francine, which made landfall in Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana. That was a Category 2 storm when it made landfall on September 9th. The hurricane caused pretty widespread power outages, flooding, damage across the region. After landfall, over 400,000 homes and businesses were without power in Louisiana and Mississippi, and they even had winds up to 80 miles per hour, causing pretty severe damage. But the storm also went to more than 10 million people under flood alerts, especially in Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, Georgia, even the Florida Panhandle. And, obviously in New Orleans. When we look at how that impacted the specific markets, according to DAT's Market Condition Index, flatbed truckload capacity was very tight last week in the Southeast region and is forecasted to remain the same into this week as well, as recovery and rebuilding efforts are already underway. On the high-volume regional flatbed lane between Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and New Orleans, volumes jumped by 17% week over week. Along the inbound, line haul rates were up about 29 cents per mile. That came at about $1.89 per mile without fuel. And short-term volatility on the Houston to New Orleans lane was also observed late last week. The 3-day spot rates were up about 58 cents per mile last Friday to an average of $2.94 per mile. Again, that's without fuel, and almost 70 cents per mile higher than the 12-month average. So if you're looking in flatbed, that's definitely a region to make some money right now as you're moving some of that hurricane relief.
Yeah, clearly an opportunity down there. And as we know, truck drivers always answering the call when there are people in need, which kind of links us, leads us to Truck Driver Appreciation Week. You always have good advice for all the folks out there as they try to navigate this crazy world that we live in. What tips do you have for them right now as we look at the current landscape?
Yeah, I mean, over the course of my decade in the trucking industry, one of the best parts is getting to talk to the great truck drivers out there all over the country. It's truly one of the best parts of my job. Truck drivers are always the best storytellers, I'll tell you. They always have great stories. Recently, I got to sit down with a driver that's been trucking for over 50 years, which is pretty insane. He's seen so much. And realistically, one of the things that he said, he gave a couple pieces of advice that I thought was profound and wanted to share with everybody is, he really focused on adaptability and perseverance. In trucking, things rarely go as planned. Routes change, weather shifts, breakdowns happen. To thrive in that unpredictable world, embrace adaptability. Stay flexible with your plans. Always have backup routes. Keep learning new skills, especially when it comes to technology or truck maintenance. Being adaptable not only helps you navigate challenges on the road, but also positions you to seize new opportunities. I know that a lot of drivers already do this today, but I think the really key is to expect something will go wrong. If you expect perfection, you'll always feel frustrated when things go wrong. And I see that all the time in drivers. They get frustrated at the small things. And when you expect something is going to happen, you've already mentally prepared for that, making it so much less frustrating and reducing your stress. I know it's easier said than done, but it is, kept this one trucker in great spirits for decades.
Yeah.
And I think it was really something that even I took away in my personal life that, everybody could look at and say, yeah, that could help me as well.
Yeah, sound advice there. More than 50 years. That, as you said, that's impressive and still going, it sounds like. So, Robert, we appreciate your time. We encourage everybody to go to dat.com/trendlines for updates on the spot market. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, thanks to Robert Rouse of DAT. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. That's our program for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.